The Little Books of Blessing. Well, the next book in the Little Books of Blessing series is called The Disastrous Decision. Well, let's turn the book over and see what it has to say on the back page. What a great invention! Timmy and Phoebe were happily moulding handfuls of dough as they tested the new Creator-Creature toy given to them by Grandma's neighbour, Mr. Johnson. But when Phoebe and Timmy ignore the instructions given to them by the inventor, they realise what a disastrous decision they have made. With a heavy heart, the children read the next chapter of the eternal love story, only to discover they are not the only ones who have to live with the consequences of making a disastrous decision. In this third little book of blessing, we learn although the king's family disobey his instructions, he does not leave them without a hope and a promise. The eternal king invites you to discover how your disastrous decisions can be changed into opportunities to learn how to live the way the king designed. Let's dive in. The Disastrous Decision. Timmy and Phoebe were sitting at Grandma's kitchen table devouring freshly baked blueberry muffins. This time they come to stay for 3 days. I've made something very special. I know you'll like it. Grandma, we love coming to your place, exclaimed Phoebe. You've always got good things for us to play with. And yummy food to eat, Timmy licked his fingers. Wash them up first. For this gift you need clean hands. Why? Timmy inquired. Grandma returned with a tray. On it were 5 big plastic tubs with lids of different colours. What is it, Grandma? Timmy was wriggling with excitement. Children, Mr. Johnson, our neighbour, shared with me a very special recipe for moulding clay. Oh, Grandma, the children groaned. We've played with Play-Doh heaps of times before. But it is not the dough that's so special. Mr. Johnson invents new toys for children. He gave us a new toy to try. It's called Creator-Creature. You set the dial and the machine creates the creature you have selected. Carefully, Grandma lifted the machine out of its box. Oh, Grandma, can I try? Timmy exclaimed, reaching to grab it from Grandma's hands. Hold on, Timmy. Grandma gently placed the machine on the table and then took out a list of instructions. This machine is very special, Timmy. There's only one like it. As I said, Mr. Johnson invented it. When I told him you were both coming to stay with us, he hoped you would test it out. If it's successful, he'll give it to a manufacturer to make more. Wow! So this is the only one? Yes. Look on the side. Grandma pointed to the dial. This allows you to make people, plants, giraffes, camels, lions, ants, zebras, almost anything. The dough the machine uses is also special. Let me show you how it works. Grandma opened one of the plastic containers and removed a small handful of pink dough. She moulded it into a ball and placed it in the top section of the machine. Then she turned the dial to select Girl, pressed the button, waited 30 seconds, and out came a pink figurine of a girl, complete with dress, shoes, and even a hair bow. So that's how it works. I'm going to walk in the garden for a bit. Phoebe, I'll leave you in charge. Please be careful with it. Now excited, Timmy reached into the tub for a handful of blue dough. Phoebe chose the pink. Oh, before I go, Grandma added, I noticed there were some important rules to follow. Rule number 1, do not push too much dough into the mould. The motor will overheat. Rule number 2, do not mix colours, they'll lose their bright colour. And rule number 3, do not allow contact with water. Oh, okay, the children nodded. Have fun, remember, I'm just in the garden. Already immersed in shaping their dough, Timmy and Phoebe scarcely heard her. Phoebe's first creation was a girl whom she named Penelope Pinky. Timmy made a boy and gave him the name Muscly Man. Timmy began shaping another creature. Holding it up, he announced, "Hello, I'm a wiggly, wiggly snake." "Timmy, did you use the mould to make that?" "No. Snake is not on the dial, so I made it myself." "Well, I don't like snakes, so keep him away from Penelope." Timmy and Phoebe continued making their own creations. "Well, my snake is going to bite Penelope Pinky." "Oh no, Timmy, you've gone and mixed the colours." Phoebe's shock grew to utter frustration. "I'm going to make more people to destroy your people," challenged Phoebe, grabbing clumps of dough and angrily pushing them into the machine. Out tumbled multicoloured people, one by one, each more murkier in colour than the other, until finally there were only grey people tumbling from the machine. Timmy quickly assembled his creatures and began rolling more and more dough to make piles of weapons. Not to be outdone, Phoebe built her own army to fight against the Timmyites. "Let's defeat the Phoebeites," Timmy growled. As the battle grew fiercer, Phoebe wished it all would end. She darted to the sink and filled a jug with water. "Here comes a tidal wave to wipe you all out," she squealed, and upended it all over the table. Almost instantly, their creations dissolved into murky, gooey, sticky putty on the table. Phoebe and Timmy sat stunned at the disastrous mess they'd made. Before they could even utter a word, Grandma came in with a huge bunch of flowers. She stopped, and with a look of horror, she asked, "Oh no, what have you done?" Phoebe looked down at the floor. She threw a little glance towards Timmy, and Timmy just looked as guilty. Then Phoebe announced, "It's all Timmy's fault. He made the snake without using the mould. Phoebe threw water over everything, so it's all her fault." "Well, children, now you'll have to clean up all the mess. Then we'll talk about Mr. Johnson's special toy." The children looked at each other. What had started as a fun activity had ended in disaster. That evening, conversation was very quiet around the dinner table. Grandma retrieved her big book. This time, Phoebe was asked to open the heavy cover. The eternal author's attention turned to the large golden book sitting beside his throne. It was time for him to share the next chapter of his story. The angels stopped their activities and settled themselves to listen. As the eternal author turned the cover, a shadow of sadness spread across his face. The angels noticed its pages were stained with tears. Every love story involves heartache and pain, and today's story shows its mark. The author drew in a deep breath. As I share the next part of the human story, we begin to see how our heavenly story intersects with the human story. You angels are acutely aware that your heavenly story is already in motion. The angels nodded. They remembered only too well the climactic war which broke out in a far region of the heavenlies. "How can we forget," commented a seraph. "Its magnitude affected us all," as one more seraph acknowledged their agreement. Long before any of you were aware, I saw the seed of pride take root in the mind of Lucifer, my morning star. The seed of pride sprouted, and before long he believed he could climb to the heights of my throne. In his pride he sighted lower angels to worship his own glorious splendor, a beauty with which I alone had adorned him. Before Lucifer could succeed in polluting my perfection, I banished him both and his newly formed cohort from my presence. It was the only way to protect my garden sanctuary from his corruption. When I created my new family, however, his heart was filled with jealousy. The very thing he had wanted to rule on my throne, I gave to my new human family. His jealousy drove him to steal my new family away from me in order to expand his following. Although I knew his pride would lead him to covet what was not his, my hope that was my new family would heed my words and guard what I had entrusted to them. The angels peered into the idyllic earthly garden sanctuary where the king's family now lived. In the days that followed my creation of my family, I taught them to store my instructions in their hearts so that they might live in my blessing in the manner for which they were designed. One day, as the first human parents were strolling the middle of the garden, a beautiful shining creature appeared from within the branches of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The very tree I had warned them was poisonous. Now my family was not surprised to see angelic creatures. His brilliant radiant colours and broad translucent wings were not unlike the other angelic creatures who surround my throne. However, this glistening creature was cunning. He confidently approached the woman and said, "I am a wise king from another kingdom. In my kingdom, I give people the freedom to make their own decisions and withhold nothing from them. They themselves determine what is good and evil." "That is true wisdom. Listen and trust in my words, and you too will have this wisdom." The woman answered, "Our king has told us we are not to eat from this tree." "That's not freedom," declared the glistening creature. "If you really want to be free, you must make decisions for yourself. You can decide how you want to rule this world. You can make this world whatever you want it to be. You can build grand buildings and that reach all the way up to heaven. You can be like the king and decide for yourself what is good and evil, what is right and wrong." The woman looked at the delicious fruit in her hand. She thought, "I want to be wise and know the difference between good and evil. Then I can decide for myself what is good and evil." The woman took a bite. The man took a bite. And as he did so, out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of the glistening creatures smiling. Or was it a smirk? He could not tell. They had scarcely swallowed when they felt it turn to stone. The seed of pride had become lodged deep into their innermost parts. They tried desperately but could not spit it out. My family immediately knew what a disastrous decision they had made. The glorious garments of light I had given them instantly dissolved, leaving them unclothed, absolutely naked. With no protection, the power and purity of my throne thrust them away, and they ran and hid. All afternoon they tried to rid themselves of the seed, but it was futile. They cried in bitter disappointment. After such a long time of talking, the eternal author leaned back in his throne, his eyes filled with tears. When I could not delay my judgment any longer, I went to find my precious family. I knew what they had done. I knew what I needed to do. Oh, how it broke my heart to see them hide from me. My justice drove me to explain the consequences for their foolish decision. My blessing must be removed. The highest heaven has been torn from the lower. To the devious, prideful creature I decreed, you are bound to the ground, your wings removed. On your belly you are confined, with only dust for sustenance. Now war will rage between you and my human family, yet one day their seed will triumph over you. To the humans I pronounced their bondage. Your relationships are now utterly broken. No longer will my blessing of fellowship unite you. Instead, there will be war between you and your seed. The ground will bear the brunt of your disobedience. By hard work and struggle will you survive. Life outside of their garden home was hard for my family. Within a few days of descending the sacred mountain, they chose a location to settle. They planted a garden and tried to get it to look as good as the one I created, but they failed. Every seventh day they obeyed me by climbing the mountain and returning to the gate of the garden. It was as close to me as they could safely come. My purity made the weight of the stony seed inside them almost unbearable. The atmosphere in heaven was silent. The king's heartache was evident for all the angels to see. As if speaking to himself, the king uttered, "The first humans, more than any other, recognized the disastrous effect of the seed of pride. The darkness of evil infiltrated every aspect of their lives, and its pollution began to spread everywhere. When they came to the gates of the garden in the weeks and months that followed, I could see the despair in their hearts. So one day I left a leaf from the tree of life outside the garden. When they picked up the leaf, they remembered the promise that I had given them. One day, from you, my seed will come." I planted a prayer inside the human heart, a cry that would be heard for many years to come. When will the child come? As she closed the book, Phoebe and Timmy did not speak. Grandma and Grandpa could tell the story had stirred their hearts. At last Phoebe mumbled quietly, "I feel a bit like the first humans. It feels like there's a stone inside my stomach," Phoebe quietly uttered. "Me too," admitted Timmy. Both Grandma and Grandpa let the silence linger. "How shall we make it up to Mr. Johnson?" Phoebe finally asked. "I'm not sure," Grandma commented. "I think we need to go and see him first thing in the morning." "That will be hard," Timmy realized. "Yes, but it is necessary. You need to take responsibility for the damage you have caused." The next morning, Grandma and the children visited Mr. Johnson. When Phoebe and Timmy owned up to what they had done, Mr. Johnson was very disappointed and described to them the enormous amount of work he had invested in his invention. "We are very, very sorry. We don't know how we can make it up to you," the children pleaded. "There are some jobs that need doing around my house. Knowing the extra work I need to do to remake this prototype, I think it would be helpful if you came around each time you come to stay at your grandparents' to do some work in the backyard for me." The children nodded sadly. Although the thought of doing jobs didn't thrill them, they knew hard work was the consequence for the mess they had caused. As they walked back, Timmy and Phoebe felt a little better as they had recalled what Mr. Johnson had said. Throughout life, we often make wrong decisions. Bearing the consequences for those choices is the pathway of learning to make wise choices in the future. Well, at the back page of every little book of blessing, the author has written a letter to her readers. The letter reads, "Dear reader, some things are best explained as a story. This story is part of the Little Books of Blessing series. Each story is designed to illustrate a simple truth about God or tell a story from God's Word in a creative and engaging manner. My prayer is as you read this little book or read the story to your little one, you may be reminded of the eternal good news story told by the grand author before time began. May each story encourage you and give you hope as we await the glorious future God has prepared. If you wish to know more about God's amazing plan for us, I would love to hear from you. With every blessing, Melinda McMahon." Well, that concludes the Disastrous Decision, Book 3 of the Little Book of Blessing series. Don't forget that Book 4 is now available. Why don't you take the time to read it now? God bless you.